Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Empowering Musicians podcast. I am your host, Michael Manley, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming my good friend, cellist, composer, and musical ambassador, Michael Fitzpatrick, to the show. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. So great to reconnect.
You too. And I am really excited for this episode to talk to you about your journey, because you started as just kind of a freelance musician like the rest of us, right?
Yeah, I always had aspirations to sort of carve a path, follow a vision. But then where we connected on Miss Saigon, circa 1997, in the Stone Age, I found what was at the time a really powerful vehicle that I could use to forward the vision that I was following.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what is that vision, if you want to give us a little more detail?
Yeah, without over dramatizing it, I had a peak experience when I was 17 years old on a concert stage in Greensboro, North Carolina. I'd won the concerto competition. It was my first solo performance with an orchestra. I had no idea, what to expect. And early in the concert, I went into the zone, okay? And time distorted. The sound seemed like it was coming from another realm, and I felt positively electrified. But I had a kinetic sense that the audience was experiencing that same electric field, right? But I also heard the sound of my cello change in a way that I'd never heard it before. And so I decided I wanted to make sure that whatever I did with the cello, assuming I was going to pursue it, was that people could actually hear my sound, right? They could actually hear that rather than being buried, third stand in the orchestra or playing in a string quartet or teaching at a university. Those were no longer options, right?
Okay.
But I didn't have a clue what that meant. And so I did what you do as a young musician. You take every gig, and I did everything from Dobbs Ferry Opera.
Okay. Didn't know that was a thing, but
that's the thing where the soprano had a memory slip, and the conductor, who had been an old violinist from the Met, whistled the aria to Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. I played in orchestras. I played in a ragtime ensemble. I played in a Greek nightclub in a Greek bouzouki band. I played in the subways. I played rock and roll. If you could think of it, I did it. And the turnkey moment was when I got invited to spend 6 days with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the sort of who's who of monks and nuns at this remote monastery in Kentucky, which is where I'm originally from. So another great example of location, location, location. It's not what you know, but who you know.
Mm-hmm.
And once I finished those performances during that week, just being in the presence of the Dalai Lama was unlike any personage I'd ever been around. No real words, but it was life altering.
Yeah.
And then I got invited to create this musical recording with his Tibetan monks, with the Trappist monks from the monastery there, with some marvelous musicians. I went out on Miss Saigon. This is where we met. I met Leisha McDuff, and it was the most beautiful flute sound I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, I need you to play on this project I'm doing inside the largest cave in the world. And she was like, cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
Okay, so that was how what was up to that point a kind of patchwork quilt became a singular colored garment that I was able to put on after the Miss Saigon show, for example.
Right.
I would go back and I would work from midnight till 6 on the pre-production of the project. It was crazy. Yeah. And it was edgy. But so my mission, to answer your question, fundamentally is to touch people's hearts with the music, with the sound, which I then defined as the golden sound. And you, as a French horn player, automatically relate to that because the French horn has the golden sound. It's one of the few instruments that indigenously has it. The cello has it, but you have to unlock it. Right?
Okay.
Every French horn player I know, now that I think about it, and I know, great ones, yourself included, they all have that, right? It's like you have to have that.
Yeah.
I didn't get that sense from my navigation through academia that was the prime directive. But my late grandmother Rose, who was an incredible pianist, one time we were rehearsing together because she was my accompanist from the time I was like 10. And, I was getting better. And finally she said, boy, your tone has really gotten nice. I said, well, thank you. I said, I've really been working on it. And she said, if you don't have a gorgeous tone at the cello, what's the point?
Amen to that.
Right?
Right. I have to tell you, my journey with the horn is a unique one because I found out from going to this music camp when I was in like 7th grade or whatever, that I lived in the middle. I was in the middle of rural Maryland, right? In the middle of this mountain. And that I found out from the teacher that I lived a mile away from a man who had a shop in the middle of the woods on the mountain who made French horns.
Whoa.
And I befriended him. He became a really important mentor in my life. But he and his sons were making these French horns, and they had their own alloy that was like their own patented metal.
Whoa.
And so when in 1991, actually, I was able to buy one of his French horns, and that's the one I still play to this day. Sadly, he passed away, and his sons, they sold the business or whatever, and I don't think anybody's making them anymore. So it's like, but what I loved about the horn was that I could never play another horn and get that same tone, right?
I hear you.
And so I feel like this horn is really special. And I always felt that way as a musician. It's like, I want to be able, like, there's always going to be a French horn player who can do more on the instrument than I can do. But like, I want to be able to play the whole note that people want to listen to.
Exactly.
That's
a beautiful way to say it. Yeah.
So when you talk about a golden sound, what does that exactly mean?
No, it's a great question. And what it means, in my conceptualization, apologize. I thought I'd shut these alarms off. I described this experience, the peak experience at age 17, to a quantum physicist that I met one time in San Francisco. Okay. And I told him what happened. And I gave more color to it. It was a real mystical experience, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It was way out there. And he says, do you understand what happened? And I said, no. Right. I mean, I know I experienced it. He said, when two sound molecules collide at a right angle, they turn into light. And then they simultaneously exhibit properties of light and sound.
Wow, that's heavy.
Okay. And it goes another step. And he says, he, as the quantum physicist, named it a phylon, Philon, which translates as a quanta of love. Okay.
Wow.
So the golden sound is love audibleized.
I love that.
Yeah. And it's also, I'm not sure what the verb would be. It's also made what's the word I'm looking for? Like there's a kinesthetic quality to it where it's actually you can actually the sound actually transmits that feeling. Okay. And how do you know that this works? Somebody's asked me many times, what's the evidence? I said, seeing the light coming out of people's eyes. It literally changes the light coming out of our eyes. And when I spent the 6 days with the Dalai Lama, I saw him embodying that. And it was the first time I'd ever seen a human being embody that phenomenon that I'd experienced when I was 17. So then to be able to play into that energy vibe that he was emanating for 6 days we were not at Carnegie Hall. We weren't in Times Square. We were in this remote limestone walled monastery, packed in. It was a heavy cast of characters, and that's when that was when I finally felt like, okay, I think I know the beginning of how to ride this horse now, and not get thrown off.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I have one question prompted by that. So if you're just practicing, like, every day you have some time with your cello, I know that for me, I don't do that, and I need to, because it's my meditation. It's like I don't have a meditative practice. I'm not good at that. But when I practice, it's my meditation, right?
Sure.
Is there a time where you're like, okay, the golden sound's not here with me today, and where you have to say, how do I get back to it? Or
well, going back to 17,
mm-hmm.
This is awesome, man. Right. Then the next day I sat down at the cello and it was gone.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay? And I couldn't figure out how to get it back. I would occasionally get a glimpse, or it would show up again in a performance. And so I was like, okay, I have to be able to do this on command. Otherwise it's not real. I mean, I don't have it. And so my solution to tracking it, like stalking it, was long tones. Super. I tended to play fast, so I forced myself to play slow, and that's been my practice the last year. Like, coming out of the pandemic, I basically rebuilt my entire cello playing system, because, kind of like what you're describing, when you're out on the road, when you're out on tour, it's not easy to do your maintenance practicing. It just isn't. And the upside is you can get away with it, sort of, because you're playing the show every night. Right. But when that stops, like when it stopped in the pandemic, and you don't have 2.5 hours, 3 hour show every night, so that your embouchure is active, and in our case, your bowing and your vibrato, those are the real keys, is how you get the vibrato wave to sync up with the way the bow is moving. And so a lot of it has to do with getting real quiet, like finding the silence and forcing oneself to sit still and do nothing, right? Long enough so that as a separate practice, so that when you go back to your instrument, and let's say you're doing a solo performance in the recital hall at the University of Las Vegas, and you come out, you take your bow, the applause has stopped, you sit there, they're ready for you to start, right? And the audience is shifting around, and they're looking at the program, and Manley, yeah, we heard he was living here, we hear he's pretty good, but, like, let's find out, right? All that's in the filter out there. Your opportunity is to go into that quiet spot that you've been cultivating and basically zap them with the silence. Okay. Once you've got them in the silence, then the tone can just pour into the silence, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a performer by nature. I'm not a practicer by nature. And so, but I've gotten to a point where I could no longer cut the corners.
Yeah.
So my practice now is very much about getting as quiet in my own mind as I can, feel the silence, and then work on these long tones, and let that then move me as I come out of it.
Yeah. What I love about what you just said is that you're describing kind of the same process that people who are doing transcendental meditation are trying to achieve, right? Getting out of the egoic mind and clearing the mind and everything through music now is what you're saying. So
Right.
In order to have that golden sound, you've got to be still in your own head and your own body.
Yes. There's a great book for anyone that's interested called Nada Brahma, Nada Brahma, Brahma, and the subtitle is The World is Sound. And this is a brilliant German writer who goes into Hindu and Vedic traditions of sound, and talks about these kinds of things in a very scientific way. I'm thinking of T.S. Eliot, where he talks about the still point, right? And that's really what we're talking about here. Once you've got access to the still point, then you can cast the sound out in the tones like spools, right?
Yeah.
And that's a great feeling. And it's, I don't know, I've been playing the cello for 48 years, and I feel like, okay, now I feel like I've got like the basics. I've got the basics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. It's like it's like you never ever master the instrument, right? It's always just a journey that you're on, and it's a process. But so you're also talking about kind of what some other writers have talked about, the flow state, right? And where you do have that sense of just being so still that you lose sense of time. It's like, oh, where did that half hour go? I've just been playing, these long tones. It's funny. I noticed that I have a few students. I don't do a lot of teaching, but I have a few students, and the ones who are really dedicated all have really good sounds. But we never talk about it. It's just it's something that just develops with them, and I'm like, oh, that's great. I don't know what it is, but
well, it's because they hear you.
I think so. Yeah,
they have something to aspire to. But imagine if you didn't have your horn teaching them in the lessons. Well, how would they know?
Right.
There's no way that they would know.
Yeah. And I feel like it's something that seems logical and intuitive, but you and I both know that we've played around people some of whom are incredibly gifted technicians and incredibly virtuosic musicians, but their sound is like, really, like, that's your sound? Like,
it's average, which is, the compliment is it's average. I could remember, not to go too far afield, but when we were on that particular Broadway tour, which shall remain nameless, and there was a solo, there was a violin solo that occurred every night in the show. And as much as I prepared for it every night, it was an assault on the nervous system.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, no matter what a player's strengths or limitations are, you can always get them to play with a beautiful sound. Always.
Yeah.
Right. Play a little closer to the fingerboard if you're a violin player. Don't press down so much. Some basic things, but we're in such a strange, disconnected world from our lineages, that some conductors nowadays, they don't even know to say, hey, you're playing way too close to the bridge. Play close to the fingerboard. You'll get a much more of a floating sound. So at that point, the inmates have taken over the asylum. Yeah. And then you're sort of, you're on your own to paddle your way through. Yeah.
But I'm so glad to talk about this, because I think it's something that young musicians need to really understand. It's like, your sound is everything. It's like your musical fingerprint. It's your personality.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah.
I wanted to just talk a little bit about, you mentioned Times Square. So can you tell us a little bit about how you played in Times Square and what that was all about?
Sure. So over the years, and basically everything that's happened to me since connecting with the Dalai Lama has been as a result of connecting with the Dalai Lama. Right? Like that was no turning back from that point on. And I've spent almost 3 decades sharing or being on the stage with him, sounding the musical keynote, sitting right next to him to set the tone for his public talk. Right?
Yeah.
And it always seemed really natural, because we had those 6 days in this remote monastery. I think if I had initially met him at some other place, like when he gave a talk at Madison Square Garden, it wouldn't have had that same sacredness to it. Right. So along the way, invitations to play at the United Nations started coming in as early as the year 2000. And I guess it was right after we came out of the pandemic. No, maybe it was before. It's been a couple performances now, 3 actually, now that I think about it. The United Nations every year has an International Day of Peace vigil, September 21st. That's UN Peace Day.
Okay.
They do a global satellite broadcast. The most recent one, Sir Ringo Starr kicked it off. Sir Paul McCartney gave a special message, and I was sort of right at high noon. I came in live from Times Square to play this piece, which I titled Invocation of the Earth, which is exactly what it sounds like, which got composed or created, or it played through me when we did the recording inside the largest cave in the world in 1999. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like these long arcs that having the fortune of seeing something evolve over a long span of time, it's really amazing because you get to look at it from all constantly different angles, right? And the dividends, as long as you tend to it, they keep accruing. So now it's kind of a standing invitation to play Times Square on September 21st with the United Nations, and then our job as the musical artist is to say to the organizers, hey, what about if we added an element to the show?
Mm-hmm.
What if we took a little more time on this area of focus and a little less on another one? What if we tightened the script a little bit? And you have to be kind of a diplomat and use skillful language so that you don't offend anyone, because everybody's got a stake in the thing.
Right.
And
yeah. So I'm just, because I used to work in Times Square, very loud, right? It's very busy.
Loud. It's busy.
So how do you create the calm, and then how do you get heard in that space?
Right. Well, let's go back to time slowing down, or Times Square slowing down, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing, my protocol is, it never changes. I come out and I played my electric cello the last two. I played my acoustic the first time, but then I was like, oh no, this is an electric cello gig.
Yeah.
This is a 5-string electric cello. You stand up to do it. But regardless if I'm standing or if I'm sitting, my protocol, which never changes, is you come out, you take the appropriate kind of bow, right? Sometimes it's not appropriate to take a bow. It would seem foolish. I have rock and roll friends in LA. They're like, you don't take a bow to start the show.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I was like, oh, you don't? I was like, oh, okay. I was like, I didn't know. I thought that's the way we were trained as classical players.
Right.
But whatever you do, once you've established your station, then you go back to what you've been practicing, sitting, of invoking that silence within yourself. Once they see that that's what's happening, they're like, oh wow, I think we're like about to go on some sort of trip here. Like, what's going on up there, right? The first time I played Times Square, it was exactly as you described it. It was noisy. People were milling about. It's right where the ticket master thing is, or the Ticketron with the steps and the statues. They built a nice stage and nobody was paying any attention. And there was no sense of an audience. So I said, hey, you guys were like, come on, come up to the stage, come closer, come closer, come closer. I said, we're going to change the channel.
Nice.
Right? We're going to change the channel. And then I just started to play out of that silence. And instead of trying to hit them hard, start with a very quiet, soft note and let it build and build and build. And then it envelops the space. And my younger sister, who's been my lifelong photographer, and who's great, but she's got a real keen ear and just sensitivity. She said, man, she goes, it was so weird. She goes, the minute you started to play, it was like everything went into slow motion. I was like, cool, because that's what it felt like to me. Right? Yeah. So it's always good when you get feedback, because it's hard to know, am I imagining this, or is this an actual collective phenomenon that we're having? And then you get to a certain point where I'm a big multiple sports fan, but Larry Bird was one of my all-time favorites, and he would basically say to the opposing players, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to dribble up the court. I'm going to spin. I'm going to fake to my left. I'm going to move to my right. You're going to try and block my shot, and I'm going to hit it right over you. He would tell them before he did it.
Wow.
Okay. And that's, I think, what we're all after at the mastery level is the ability to, I think, to fully answer your question, every time be able to create that golden sound. Every time, invoke that silence. There's a great Miles Davis anecdote where they're up on stage and he's got a new member of the band. He's a young guy, and it's not going well. And the crowd is booing. They're throwing stuff. And of course, Miles has his back to them. He's not even paying attention to them. And the rookie is panicking. And Miles said to him, there are two vibes, the vibe up here and the vibe out there. And by the end, they were cheering and applauding and standing up. Right. Mm. So that's the thing. You got to own it. And then if necessary, punch.
Yeah.
Right?
So give me an example of what that is. Like when you say
you have to punch.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes the punch, again, I'm a boxing fan, Muhammad Ali. I come from Kentucky and had the great honor of being the co-music director with my rock and roll buddy, CJ Vanston, who had been Tina Turner's and Joe Cocker's and Spinal Tap's music director.
Wow. That's the lineup.
And it's a total genius. What he was able to do in the kind of like Paul Schaefer, like he was just a wizard, and I got to play along, basically, and I would add my energy. But we talked a lot about Ali, who we got the time to spend with, and in the famous rope-a-dope fight against George Foreman, where his success was in not trying to punch him, but to take the punch. So I've been in situations. I was actually in one when I played for the 79th anniversary of D-Day in Normandy just 3 weeks ago.
Wow. And
I'm in this 12th century church that had somehow survived the bombing, and
wow,
it's unspeakable stuff. And I'm playing along, and the rock band that was apparently going to play that night decided they were going to do their sound check on the stage right next to the church. And it was easily 100 decibels coming through the Stones.
Oh my God.
And I'm in the middle of the Ave Maria.
Okay. With guitar,
with obligato, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, okay, I'm just going to have to outplay them with volume. So I tried that. That didn't work. So then I was like, and I've used this to effect in other performances when people are chatting, they're talking out there. And I used to try and overplay them and drown them out. And then I realized, better to play as quietly as possible because then it exposes them. And then everybody turns around and is basically like, shut up. Right?
Yeah.
I tried that, but that didn't work because the rock band, they're not hearing anything.
Yeah.
So I was like, at that point, we have a situation. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's a crisis. And everybody in the church is aware of the crisis. Right. And it seems like there's no way to solve this. And I was like, all I had left was to sync up my beat with their beat. And it was slightly faster than I tend to play the Ave Maria. So I just moved it forward a little bit. The thing lines up. It canceled it out.
That's brilliant.
And for whatever reason, the minute I finished the piece, they stopped the sound check. Okay. And then I played out my final two songs. So those are the types of punches or counter punches you can use to keep control of a situation, and all that you want to do is let go.
Yeah.
Strange paradox.
So it's like judo, where you're taking somebody else's energy and deflecting it versus meeting it with force.
That's exactly what it is.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, this has been an amazing conversation with you today. And I know that there's a ton more that I want to talk about with you.
Okay.
Most people don't realize that we have a long-standing joke regarding Fernet that's been going back for a while, and I don't even know how it started.
I don't know either.
It's involved lots and lots of puns around Fernet.
Right.
So we have to get into that.
We will.
And I also want to talk more about some of the current projects you have. And unfortunately, I have to run this afternoon to a friend's birthday, which I'm excited about. Awesome. But would you come back next week so we could do part 2 of this interview?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I apologize for having to cut it short, but I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation next week. And you can reach Michael at www.michaelfitzpatrick.com.
Yep.
And thank you so much for coming. And we'll look forward to continuing next week when we can dig a little deeper.
Super. Thank you so much, Michael.
You're very welcome. Take care, everyone.
See ya.